On the evening of June 19th, 1989, Livonia Police Sergeant Donald Vandersloot responded to a call that would remain unsolved for years. A home on 7 Mile Road had become the scene of a brutal shooting, and when Vandersloot arrived, he found the lifeless body of 67-year-old Xavier Giller lying on the concrete driveway. Giller, the owner of a Detroit cab company, had been shot, his feet pointed toward the street, and his right hand inches away from a .38 caliber revolver. Investigators would later determine that Giller had fired 2 shots in self-defense, but neither had struck his attacker. Inside the house, the evidence pointed to a robbery gone wrong. The master bedroom showed signs of ransacking. Items had been laid out on the bed as if prepared for removal, and drawers had been left open and emptied. It seemed clear that the intruders had broken in, intending to steal, but were interrupted when Giller and his wife, Catherine, arrived home earlier than expected. Rather than fleeing, the burglars decided to stay and confront the homeowners. At least 3 firearms had been stolen from the residence, but no fingerprints or significant physical evidence could be recovered. The only witness to the attack was Catherine Giller, who had narrowly survived the encounter. She recounted the terrifying moments before her husband's death. As she entered the house carrying groceries, she reached for the light switch, only for a tall, bearded man to step out of the shadows. His head nearly touched the archway, and he issued a chilling warning. "Don't touch it, or I'll waste you right here." Before she could react, she was struck over the head, knocking her unconscious. When she came to, she provided detectives with a description of 2 men, one tall and thin with a beard, and the other shorter. The investigation initially focused on those within Giller's circle. He was well known in the community, and some of his associates at the cab company were known to be involved in questionable dealings. Detectives received tips that Giller had spoken openly about keeping large amounts of cash at his home, information that could have made him a target. Despite interviewing over 50 individuals, the investigation stalled. With no leads, no fingerprints, and no witnesses beyond Catherine's limited recollection, the case eventually went cold. 15 years passed before the break investigators had been waiting for. On December 7th, 2004, a woman named Bonnie Swoboda, Xavier Giller's daughter, received a cryptic phone call from an anonymous woman in California. The caller mistakenly referred to the victim as Mr. Gilliam, but knew key details about the case, including the fact that he had been shot and had sons. When Bonnie corrected her, the woman admitted she had information about Giller's murder and promised Bonnie would find out by Christmas. Then she hung up. Detectives quickly traced the call to California, where Sergeant Corey Williams made contact with the woman. Initially nervous, she eventually agreed to talk and revealed that she had fallen in love with a man named Richard Moudica, a former prison cellmate of her brother. She had encouraged Moudica to confess his past sins as proof of his commitment to faith and her. In response, Moudica wrote her a letter detailing a crime he had once committed, a robbery that had escalated into murder. In his letter, Moudica admitted that in the summer of 1989, he had gone on a robbery spree with a man named Richard Lawson. The two had specifically targeted Xavier Giller because Lawson had once worked as a driver for his cab company and knew Giller kept large amounts of cash at home. They had broken into the house and were in the middle of collecting valuables when the Gillers arrived home. According to Moudica, Lawson was the trigger man. He recalled how Lawson stepped outside, leveled a shotgun at Giller, and fired. Almost simultaneously, Giller had managed to shoot back, though his bullets found no target. Moudica described the chilling moment when they fled the scene, running past Giller as he lay gasping for breath, knowing they had left him to die. Armed with this new confession, detectives worked to track down the 2 suspects. Moudica was already in custody in California, but Lawson's whereabouts were unknown. Eventually, an old arrest record from 1989 in Pennsylvania confirmed that Lawson had been arrested alongside Moudica. It was the break they needed. They traced him to San Diego, where he was on probation. Detectives traveled to California, walked into a probation office, and placed Richard Lawson under arrest for the murder of Xavier Giller. During questioning, Lawson initially denied any involvement, claiming he didn't know Xavier Giller. But when detectives produced a cab company ID card showing his picture, he was forced to admit that he had worked for Giller in the past. As the interrogation continued, his responses became increasingly vague. When asked directly, "Did you shoot Xavier Giller?" Lawson responded, "I don't know." The case against Lawson strengthened further when detectives recovered stolen weapons linked to the crime. During an interview, Moudica had provided a map showing where Lawson had dumped the guns in a pond in New Jersey. Though investigators believed it was unlikely they would still be there after 15 years, they decided to search anyway. To their astonishment, divers located 4 weapons at the bottom of the pond. 3 were confirmed as stolen from the Giller residence. Though none turned out to be the murder weapon, the discovery lent credibility to Moudica's testimony. Before the trial, prosecutors asked Moudica to testify at a preliminary hearing. Lawson, in an overconfident move, fired his attorney and chose to represent himself. It turned out to be a disastrous decision. While questioning Moudica, he repeatedly referred to himself as being at the crime scene, asking questions like, "What time did we arrive?" and "What time did we do this?" The judge repeatedly warned him that he was making self-incriminating statements, but Lawson persisted. At one point, he even described a construction site near the Giller home, a detail only someone who had been there would know. With overwhelming evidence against him, the jury found Richard Lawson guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Moudica, who had cooperated with investigators, received a lesser sentence in exchange for his testimony. For the Giller family, justice had been a long time coming. Bonnie Swoboda and her siblings finally had answers after 15 years of uncertainty. They had spent over a decade wondering who had taken their father's life, and now they could finally find some closure. While no sentence could bring Xavier Giller back, the knowledge that his killers would spend the rest of their lives behind bars brought them some measure of peace. As for Richard Lawson, he remained unrepentant, offering no apology or explanation for his actions. His only regret seemed to be getting caught. His family, however, struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the murderer he had become. Meanwhile, the Giller family could finally move forward, knowing justice had been served. In the end, it took over 15 years, a mysterious phone call, a lover's plea for honesty, and a search in a murky pond to bring a killer to justice. But persistence paid off, and the case that had once seemed impossible to solve finally reached its conclusion. Phyllis New was known for her warmth and kindness. A loving wife and a dedicated friend, she spent her days nurturing relationships and ensuring those around her felt cared for. She had a strong sense of loyalty and believed in honesty, which is why the deception she discovered in her marriage came as a devastating blow. Phyllis had been married to Bill New, a man she trusted and built a life with. Friends described her as strong-willed, intelligent, and compassionate, qualities that made her a beloved member of her community. However, behind the walls of their home, tensions were rising. For months, Phyllis had suspected something was off about Bill's work situation. He claimed to have a job, but inconsistencies in his stories led her to question him. Her suspicions peaked when she contacted the temp agency he allegedly worked for, only to be told they had no record of him. Furious, Phyllis confronted Bill, making it clear that she would follow him to work the next morning to see the truth for herself. She demanded proof, a pay stub, a time card, something to verify that he had been honest with her. But within hours of that confrontation, Phyllis was dead. The early morning hours of that tragic day unfolded in a chilling sequence. At 4:02 a.m., a distressed Bill New called 911, reporting that his wife had been shot in the head while he was out running an errand. According to Bill, he had left the house to buy Phyllis some medication and returned roughly 30 minutes later to find their home broken into and his wife murdered in their bed. Paramedics arrived within minutes, only to find a disturbing contradiction. Phyllis had already been dead for hours. Signs of lividity and rigor mortis made it clear to investigators that the murder had not happened within the short window of time Bill claimed. The evidence suggested that Phyllis had been killed much earlier, throwing suspicion on Bill's alibi. Further inconsistencies at the crime scene fueled investigators' doubts. The home appeared staged to resemble a burglary, but key details didn't add up. A jewelry box had been tampered with, but only the top drawers were disturbed, leaving valuable items untouched. It was a clumsy attempt to mislead detectives. Then there was the manner of Phyllis's death. She had been shot execution-style in her sleep, an uncommon method for a home invasion. Burglars typically act out of desperation, not calculated precision. It was becoming clear that this was not a random crime. It was personal. The focus of the investigation quickly shifted to the one person who had everything to gain from her death, Bill New. When detectives confronted Bill, his timeline remained uncertain. He claimed he wasn't sure when Phyllis woke him up or exactly how long he had been gone. He estimated his trip took anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, just enough time, he hoped, to keep him from being a suspect. But as the pieces of the puzzle came together, Bill's web of lies began to unravel. Adding to the suspicion was Bill's reaction upon discovering his wife's body. He never attempted CPR and never checked for a pulse. Even when the 911 dispatcher offered guidance on performing first aid, he refused to go back into the room. Instead, he made the call from another part of the house and waited for authorities to arrive. It was a cold and calculated move, raising questions about his true emotions that night. Then came the most damning revelation. A close friend of Phyllis, Nancy's friend, recalled a chilling detail from years earlier. During one of their conversations, Phyllis had confided in her about Bill's past. She revealed that his first wife, Somsri New, had died in a tragic accident while 8 months pregnant. According to Bill, he had been cleaning a gun when it fell, discharged, and shot her from across the room. Nancy had been disturbed by the story at the time, but after Phyllis's murder, she knew it was more than a coincidence. Nancy called the detectives and relayed what she knew. Investigators immediately revisited the 1973 case of Somsri New's death. Bill had told officers that it was an unfortunate accident, but when they dug deeper, the evidence told a different story. Old crime scene photos revealed inconsistencies in the trajectory of the bullet. The blood spatter pattern didn't align with Bill's account of the shooting. A forensic expert confirmed that the gun could not have fired the way Bill described. The conclusion was inescapable. Somsri's death had been murder. Bill had escaped justice once before, collecting $15,000 in life insurance from his first wife's death, which was a significant amount in 1973. Decades later, history repeated itself. With Phyllis's murder, Bill's son was set to inherit $800,000 from her life insurance policy. The financial motive was clear, and now investigators had the evidence to prove that Bill had been a killer for over 30 years. By April 2005, Bill New was arrested and charged with the murders of both Somsri and Phyllis. Prosecutors decided to try the cases together, believing that the similarities between the two crimes were too strong to ignore. When the trial began in February 2006, the prosecution laid out a compelling case. Witness testimonies, forensic analysis, and decades of deception painted a damning picture of a man who had built his life on lies and murder. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict of guilty. Bill New was convicted of murdering both of his wives in cold blood. The judge handed down a severe sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years. Bill's decades-long secret had finally caught up with him. For Phyllis's family, justice had been a long and painful road. Though nothing could bring her back, knowing that Bill would never harm another person again brought them some solace. As for Bill's own family, the truth was devastating. To them, he had been a husband, a father, a friend. Now he was a convicted killer, exposed for who he truly was. Bill New was sent to a California correctional facility, where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The case served as a grim reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, will always catch up to those who believe they can escape it. Phyllis and Somseri's deaths were tragic, but in the end their voices were heard, and their killer finally paid the price. The tragic case of Phyllis New is a haunting reminder of how deception and greed can lead to devastating consequences. For decades, Bill New lived a double life, hiding behind a mask of normalcy while carrying the dark secret of murder. His crimes went unnoticed for years, but justice eventually caught up with him. Thanks to determined investigators, forensic advancements, and the courage of those who spoke out, Bill was finally held accountable for the lives he destroyed. Cases like this highlight the importance of seeking the truth, no matter how long it takes. If something feels off in a relationship, workplace, or community, speaking up could save a life. If you ever suspect foul play or know someone in danger, don't ignore the warning signs. Report it. Justice prevails when people stand together against wrongdoing. Let Phyllis and Somseri's story serve as a lesson. The truth may take time, but it always finds a way to the surface. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous situation, seek help. Speak up, because silence can cost lives, but courage can bring justice. On a warm summer night in 1970, 4-year-old Heidi Jones lay in bed, her small body nestled under the covers as her mother, 24-year-old Loretta Jones, tucked her in. The young single mother was raising Heidi in the quiet town of Price, Utah, doing her best to provide a safe and loving home. That evening, something about her mother's demeanor felt different. Before stepping out of the room, Loretta turned back and looked at her daughter with an unusual seriousness. "Don't come out," she instructed Heidi. It wasn't a request, it was a firm command. Heidi, still half asleep, nodded. What else could a 4-year-old do? She didn't question her mother, and she obeyed. The next morning, the sun poured through the windows, signaling a new day, but something felt wrong. The house was eerily quiet. Heidi, still in her bedroom, slowly opened her door, peering through the dimly lit hallway. As she stepped into the front room, she was met with a scene that no child should ever have to witness. Her mother lay motionless on the floor. There was blood on the couch, the floor, the walls. The room was a mess of violence, but Heidi didn't cry. She didn't scream. A part of her young mind understood something terrible had happened, even if she couldn't process it fully. Confused and afraid, Heidi wandered out onto the front porch. A neighbor, an older man, was outside digging in the dirt for worms. Spotting her standing alone, he looked up and smiled. "Heidi, come here. I have to show you something." But Heidi shook her head. Her voice, small but certain, cut through the morning air. "I can't. I think my mom is dead." Police arrived at the house shortly after, and what they discovered inside horrified even the most seasoned detectives. Loretta Jones had been brutally murdered. She had been sexually assaulted, stabbed twice in the chest, and then viciously stabbed 17 more times in the back. There was even an attempt to slit her throat. The sheer brutality of the attack suggested rage, something personal, but what puzzled investigators was the lack of forced entry. No broken windows and no signs of struggle at the door. It appeared that whoever had killed Loretta had been invited inside. Investigators meticulously searched the crime scene, gathering evidence. They collected fingerprints, fibers, and blood samples, but there was little to point to a definitive suspect. Meanwhile, Heidi, now under the care of her grandparents, was questioned by detectives. They gently asked if she had heard or seen anything that night. Her young mind struggled to piece together the fragments of memory. "I know something is trapped in my brain," she would later recall. "I believe it was too traumatic for me to remember." Yet, there was one thing she knew with absolute certainty. "Tom did it," she told her grandmother. "Tom killed my mom." The name was chilling in its simplicity. Tom. No last name, no description, just a name. But a name that Heidi repeated with unwavering certainty. Investigators scoured through Loretta's life, searching for any Tom she may have known. Then, on August 1st, a call came into the sheriff's office. The tipster urged them to investigate a man named Tom Egley, a railroad worker. It turned out Loretta had gone on a blind date with him once, but she hadn't been interested. She had wanted nothing to do with him, and yet her daughter's memory pointed straight to him. At the time of the murder, Tom Egley had been living in a motel in Helper, Utah, with his girlfriend, who was 8 months pregnant. Investigators brought him in for questioning, and he offered a carefully crafted alibi. He claimed he had hitched a ride with 2 teenagers that night, grabbed a burger from a fast food restaurant in Price, and later ended up at the Highway Rendezvous Bar around 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. But witnesses at the bar recalled his odd behavior. He was jittery and nervous, and the bar owner distinctly remembered seeing red specks on his shirt. When asked about them, Tom casually said he had been painting. Police searched his motel room, collecting a pair of Levi's jeans and a shirt he claimed to have worn that night. Forensic analysis revealed that carpet fibers from his clothing matched fibers from Loretta's living room rug. It was circumstantial, but it was something. Based on this, he was arrested. During the preliminary hearing, prosecutors presented what little evidence they had: witness testimonies, the fiber match, and Heidi's consistent identification. But the defense argued that Tom had been inside Loretta's home before, meaning the fiber evidence wasn't conclusive proof of his presence that night. With no physical evidence tying him directly to the murder and no confession, the judge ruled there wasn't enough to proceed to trial. Tom Egley walked free. For decades, Loretta's case remained unsolved. The horror of that night faded into silence. But Heidi never forgot. She grew up carrying the weight of an unproven truth. Then, years later, a shocking new piece of evidence surfaced. A woman came forward claiming she had seen something no one had ever mentioned before. Loretta had written her killer's name in blood. The woman had been living with Heidi's grandmother at the time of the murder. She recalled that the day after the crime, she and one of Loretta's sisters were allowed inside the house to collect some of Heidi's belongings. On the blood-stained floor, she saw letters written in blood. T and O. It was as if Loretta had tried to name her killer but had been too weak to finish. With this new revelation, the case was reopened, but investigators needed more. That's when Lisa Carter, a woman who had once known Tom Egley, agreed to go undercover. She befriended him, gained his trust, and subtly steered their conversations toward Loretta's murder. Then one night, Tom confessed. He spoke about the night in chilling detail. He had knocked on Loretta's door, and she let him in. Then he attacked. When Lisa pressed further, asking if he had assaulted Loretta, his response was void of remorse. "Yeah, of course I had sex with her," he said. "It was consensual." When she challenged him, "Tom, you stabbed her." How was that consensual? Зрение, его ответ был даже холоднее. She didn't tell me no. With this confession, law enforcement finally had the evidence they needed. After 46 years, justice had caught up with Tom Egley. In court, when given the chance to speak, he simply shrugged. "I'm sorry I killed her," he said. "I'm surprised you're doing something about it after 46 years." For Loretta's family, the pain of those lost years could never be erased. But finally, the truth had been recognized, and her murderer was held accountable. Some crimes may go unsolved for decades, but the truth has a way of finding the light, and for Heidi, the little girl who had never stopped believing, that moment had finally arrived.